Your phone dies in the middle of an unfamiliar city. No Maps app, no blue dot, just streets you have never walked before. Your chest tightens. Your steps slow down. You feel, for a moment, completely helpless. But here is the strange part. Your ancestors never had a blue dot either. They crossed deserts, forests, and open ocean without a single satellite watching over them. And most of the time, they did not get lost. Why did losing your way used to be rare, and now it feels like a crisis the second your battery hits 1%? The honest answer is not about paper maps or ancient compasses. There were no compasses for most of human history. The real answer is stranger, and it lives inside your skull right now. You are carrying a navigation system built over millions of years, and modern life has quietly switched it off. Start with the ocean. Long before satellites, Polynesian navigators crossed thousands of miles of open Pacific water without instruments. They read the swell of the waves through the hull of the canoe, feeling which direction the water was pushing from underneath their feet. They tracked stars rising and setting at fixed points on the horizon, memorizing an entire sky as a rotating compass. They watched the flight patterns of birds returning to land at dusk, knowing exactly how far those birds could travel before nightfall. No compass. No chart, just a mind trained from childhood to treat the entire ocean as a giant, memorized structure. Modern sailors who tried to relearn these techniques in the 20th century needed years of training just to approach what these navigators did instinctively, and even then, many never fully matched it. That is not folklore. That is a documented human capability, and it did not come from nowhere. It came from your brain's oldest mapping system. Neuroscientist John O'Keefe discovered a class of neurons in the hippocampus that fire only when an animal is in a specific location, as if each cell is a tiny flag planted on an internal map. He called them place cells. Every time you walked into a new clearing, every time your ancestors entered a new valley, these cells activated in unique patterns, silently building a mental floor plan of the world. You were never wandering blindly. Your hippocampus was drawing a map in real time, whether you noticed it or not. This was not a metaphor. It was measurable, repeatable, and it explained something that had puzzled scientists for decades. How does an animal without language, without symbols, without any written record, still find its way back to a nest, a den, or a watering hole from miles away? But a floor plan alone will not get you home. You also need a sense of direction and distance, a kind of internal odometer that keeps counting even when you are not paying attention. That is where grid cells come in. Researchers May-Britt Moser and Edvard Moser found neurons arranged in a hexagonal firing pattern, tiling space like invisible graph paper across the entorhinal cortex. Their discovery, which earned a share of the Nobel Prize, showed that your brain does not just remember landmarks. It calculates coordinates. It tracks how far you have gone and in what direction, updating constantly, even in total darkness. Ancient humans crossing a fogged-in valley or a moonless plain were not guessing. Their grid cells were quietly counting every step, converting each stride into a running estimate of exactly where they stood in space, without a single conscious calculation. Here is where it gets personal. Neuroscientist Eleanor Maguire studied London taxi drivers who must memorize 25,000 streets and thousands of landmarks before they can get licensed. She found their posterior hippocampus was measurably larger than average, and the longer someone had been driving, the bigger it grew. Practice was not just improving performance. It was physically reshaping the brain's map-making region, adding volume to a structure most people assume is fixed for life. Now flip that finding around. If heavy use grows this structure, what happens when you almost never use it? That is exactly what is happening to you. Every time you follow a turn-by-turn voice instead of building your own mental route, you are outsourcing the very process that once reshaped human brains for survival. Studies on habitual GPS users have found reduced activity in the hippocampus during navigation tasks, along with weaker spatial memory when the device is taken away and the route has to be recalled from scratch. You are not imagining that helpless feeling when your phone dies. Your internal map-making system has been sitting idle, and idle systems do not respond instantly when you finally need them. Think about what was actually at stake for early humans. Getting lost on the savannah was not an inconvenience. It could mean missing the one watering hole for 50 miles, wandering into a predator's territory at dusk, or failing to return before nightfall in a world without streetlights, roads, or rescue parties. Natural selection had no patience for a species that could not find its way home, which means your capacity for spatial memory was not a bonus feature. It was as essential as your immune system, sharpened generation after generation by consequences that were often fatal, and passed down through every ancestor who made it back alive. This is also why children raised in different environments show different spatial abilities before they ever touch a map. Kids who grow up navigating dense, unpredictable terrain, like forests or mountain villages, often outperform city-raised children on certain spatial reasoning tasks, even when both groups are equally intelligent by every other measure. The environment itself is training the hippocampus, the same way it trained the hippocampus of a hunter tracking prey across unmarked terrain 20,000 years ago. Your ancestors were not smarter navigators because they were smarter people. They were better navigators because they had no choice but to practice constantly, every single day, with real consequences for failure. And notice something else. Ancient wayfinding was never purely visual. Inuit hunters read wind-carved snow patterns called sastrugi to determine direction under featureless white skies, where every horizon looked identical to an untrained eye. They could tell which way a storm had passed weeks earlier just by running a hand across a ridge of packed snow. Aboriginal Australian communities encoded entire travel routes into songlines, oral maps passed down through generations that linked landmarks to specific verses, so that a person could sing their way across a continent, recalling water sources and safe paths through nothing more than melody and rhythm. Miss a verse, and you might miss a water source that meant the difference between finishing the crossing and not finishing it at all. These were not superstitions. They were functioning navigation systems built from memory, sound, and story, refined over thousands of years because the terrain itself offered no other clues. So what actually changed? It is not that modern humans lost the hardware. Your hippocampus and entorhinal cortex are still there, still capable of the same place cells and grid cells that guided a Polynesian canoe or an Inuit hunter across the ice. What changed is that you almost never ask them to work. A voice tells you to turn left in 200 feet, and your brain quietly stops building the map, because why build something a machine will hand you for free? That trade might save you a wrong turn today, but it is quietly weakening a system that took millions of years to construct, one that your ancestors depended on for their very survival, every single time they left camp and every single time they needed to find it again. Here is the counterintuitive twist. The people you might assume were more primitive for lacking modern tools were, in this one specific way, operating a more sophisticated system than you. They were not limited by the absence of maps. They were sharpened by it. Every unmarked trail forced their hippocampus to work harder, and every successful return home reinforced neural pathways that most people today rarely touch in an entire year. Consider that for a moment. A hunter with no formal schooling could hold a mental map of hundreds of square miles, while many modern adults struggle to describe the layout of their own neighborhood without picturing the map app first. The tool you think of as progress, the map that thinks for you, may be the very thing dulling an ability that once kept your entire species alive when a wrong turn meant never coming home at all. Even the way you dream about places you know reflects this system at work. People who navigate frequently without assistance often report more vivid, detailed dreams of layouts and routes, as if the hippocampus keeps rehearsing its maps even while you sleep, consolidating the day's wandering into long-term memory. Ancient hunters likely relied on this nightly rehearsal more than they ever realized, replaying a day's trail through unfamiliar terrain so that the route became permanent before the next dawn. You still have this capacity. It just rarely gets fed anything worth rehearsing because the route was handed to you by a screen instead of built by your own trial and error. There is a strange comfort in this, if you think about it the right way. The circuitry has not vanished. It has not been bred out of you over a few generations of convenience. Brains do not rewire that fast, and evolution does not delete a system this old just because it went unused for a decade or two. Somewhere underneath the layered convenience of turn-by-turn directions, your place cells and grid cells are still firing every time you walk somewhere new, quietly building a map you never bother to consult. The system that carried human beings across every ocean, desert, and ice sheet on Earth without a single satellite is still running in the background of your own mind right now, waiting for you to actually look at what it has already drawn. So the next time your phone dies in an unfamiliar place, notice what is actually happening. That rising panic is not proof that you are helpless without technology. It is a signal that an ancient, extraordinarily capable system inside your own skull has been switched to standby for years. It is still there. It is just waiting for you to stop handing away the one job it was built, over millions of years of survival pressure, to do better than any device ever could. Your phone dies in an unfamiliar city, and for the first time in a long time, you might actually have to find your own way home. using the same map-making mind that once carried an entire species across oceans and deserts without a single wrong turn costing them everything.